So thank you very much for the kind invitation to this extremely interesting series of talks, and also for giving me the chance to deal with the subject I like the most. After talking so much about Roman temples, it's a pleasure to go back to the Iron Age. Well, I also thank the colleagues that are present in this talk. Some of them I'm very happy to see here. So I hope we will have the chance to have a chat later on in the discussion, if it's there any. Yeah. So first things first, I cannot start this talk without expressing my concern. For me, sometimes it's really difficult, especially now in these times, in these very dark times, to talk about pots and to talk about stratigraphies and chronologies when I know that many people is suffering. For me, it's extremely difficult, and I want to express my wish that wars will stop soon. No more wars, please. Second, I can't start the talk without giving some words for someone who has been very important in my life, not only in my academic life, Professor María Eugenia, who passed early this year. María Eugenia is Tyre, and Tyre is María Eugenia. So we miss her a lot, and I would like to express these feelings. This photo is from the last time. No, it's not the last time. This is from the campaign of 2019 in Tyre. We are sitting in the terrace of Alfanar, one of her favorite places, overlooking the Mediterranean. And we are here with our colleague, our friend, their friend, Alfredo Mederos. And also, I have to remember another very important person, which is Marco Rendeli. Many of the ideas that I'm going to express here today were generated in long talks with him in my time in Sardinia. I owe a lot to Marco. He helped me a lot in times that were, difficult times. So I also want to express and to give some words to his memory. Here we are with our dearest friend, Giuseppe Pisanu, this is the laboratory of the museum in Cagliari, looking at pots I think this is 2018 or something like that. So let's go to the talk we are here for today. If you are expecting me to give you intense list of pots types and their different versions all over the Mediterranean, this is not the place. I don't think that anyone could survive that, especially with this heat. So instead, I was when Kasia offered me the chance to talk to you, I thought it would be better to give some ideas, some considerations about more the social approach to pottery, to the Phoenician pottery. What is the Phoenician pottery? What is the social circumstances, the approaches, trying to understand the pottery varieties all over the Mediterranean from the regions they were produced. So this communication structure will be, as you can see, first we will talk briefly about what is Phoenician ceramics. That is interesting in a way. The problems that are around the study of Phoenician pottery nowadays. As I said before, I would like to go beyond typologies. So I would like to go deep into the social dimension of these ceramic assemblages. Then I will try to synthesize what is the Iron Age ceramics in the Central Levant, and later we'll try to see how these characteristics are reflected in other places in the Mediterranean. So starting first, what is Phoenician pottery? This is a tricky question. Nowadays, especially since we don't know anymore what is Phoenician, because we are still now thinking who are the Phoenicians actually, and what is the limit of Phoenicia, and what it can be considered as Phoenician. So we have to go into questions of identity and cultural materiality, etc. So now I will consider that Phoenician pottery, the pottery that is produced, at least in the central and the northern part of South Levant, will be that, because the limit will be biblos more or less, because the problem is that our knowledge of Iron Age pottery in, for example, in the coast of Syria is very limited. Sianu, Turtanu, Telsukas, they were more interested on the Greek stuff. Tel Russell Basit, there was some material published. I didn't have the chance to check the new publication, so I will try to do it. And later we have, yeah, the northern part, which Almina as a mythological place. So one important question is that this Phoenician pottery that generates from late Bronze Age or Middle Bronze Age paradigms develops itself all over the first half of the first millennium BC in a very logical way, I have to say. We have still to understand regionalism, but it's very logical, somehow homogeneous. And all these parameters, later, they were moved to the central and the Western Mediterranean and the coast of the Atlantic. And there we can see how all these principles experienced an evolution by their own. So it's somehow it's a trans-Mediterranean phenomenon with a lot of particularities that sometimes are complicated to understand. Also, it's complicated to understand whether this will be the extension of this Phoenician pottery productions, Central Mediterranean, with Carthage as a very important pole. Here I only represented Tyre because this is I took that from Maria Eugenia's book, and Tyre and the West, and obviously because Tyre is only represented here in the West, but we have to represent Saida, Beirut, Dor, Kaysan, etc., to the Western Mediterranean and also the Atlantic. So the problems. When we want to deal with a pottery, with a Phoenician pottery, we are in the Levant, we have to face serious problems considering the unbalanced representation of the materials. The quantity and quality of the results in places, for example, like Dor or all the sites around the Haifa, Mount Carmel, show an unbalanced picture of what really was. And sometimes I think that this unbalanced situation can lead to misreadings and sometimes assumptions that can be not real or not correct or not completely correct. Obviously, now with the works that we are developing in central Levant, in Lebanon, like Tyre, like Saida, Tel Burak, Beirut, etc. I think our knowledge of what happens in central Levant is improving. And also I can say that new evidences can counterbalance the situation in terms of quantity, quality, and also in of representativeness. So I think this big pole that could be, for example, Mont Carmel area can only reflect what was happening in other areas in the central Levant, for instance. I don't think it's a single phenomenon. The second point is sequence versus chronology. We are talking a lot about chronology nowadays, but we are forgetting sequence. We are playing with C14 dates. We are doing very complicated frameworks with C14 dates, the oldest, the better, but we are forgetting about the sequence. So people talking about C14 are forgetting completely what is the sequence about. And in many cases, you can see that they forget completely about sequence. So they don't care about it. So we are talking more, as archaeologists, we are talking more about radioactive elements than rims and handles, which is a problem because we are losing the focus. And connected with chronology, you can see everywhere in the Mediterranean that we have a quest to be the oldest. We have to find the oldest piece of evidence, the oldest or the first everywhere, which is complicated. And sometimes it's not like that. So, and it all affects the whole approach to the problems on the questions we have to set. So, if we talk to the pottery, we have to go beyond typologies because typologies are our organization, but it's not necessarily the social organization of their own material. And there's one point that is essential here, which is demand. Demand dictates what is produced and for what. So depending on the circumstances of the workshop, this demand can be met or not in different ways. And this demand is going to be met by using their traditional ways of working. So the produce are going to be the ceramic products that are recognizable by the society and they can be used by society. So this is the most important here. Demand, leaving production to an element that is depending on that demand, and later distribution, obviously. So the most important is, I think it's very interesting and very relevant to consider that products are consequence of the demand made real by the technical and the skills of the workshops. Also important is, if we have to consider the social dimension of these pottery productions, is what is pottery for these societies in the Levant. And pottery was something functional and not very well perceived. For them, the ideal was to use metallic wares. Pottery was cheap, as it was the cheapest way to do whatever they have to do. But considering that, always in mind that metallic wares were, like I said, the ideal for them in any social context, I mean, ritual, religious, or the social interaction. they were the metallic wares. I mean, for example, you have in Ugarit, you have lists of pottery prices of pottery. They are very, very cheap, couple of shekels of silver shekels for I don't know how many dozens of pots. However, metallic wares were very, very expensive. And somehow the explosion of red slip wares in the 9th century should be linked to probably changes in the society of the Levantine cities. Why? This is another question. Probably is a reflection of all the commercial activities that were going on, not only in the Levant, but also in Cyprus and the Central and the Western Mediterranean. Even though Central and Western Mediterranean were quite autonomous economically speaking. We go to that later. So we have the productions of these workshops. This is the famous workshops in Sarepta, with 1,000 years of pottery production in that area. So, as I said, their products are deeply rooted in the traditions, and they knew how to meet the demand of their societies, and they followed their own ways to do that, making products that were easily recognizable and functional. But the problem is sometimes when we want to talk about workshops, we think of one workshop, which is probably not the question here. It's not the point. One nice evidence for that we have in Tyre. These are urns from the cemetery of Tyre. The tombs are contemporaneous. Actually, this is a tomb, this is a single urn, and this is another tomb. As you can see, these 4 urns are almost identical, or they follow the same patterns, morphological and decorative patterns. So probably we are seeing here the products of one workshop. I mean, we don't know if this the same batch or not, or how many years or are distant the productions of these urns, but we see that there are an homogeneity in them. But the second urn here, the second urn is also local and is different. So are we here facing another workshop in Tyre? Because we have other cases where you can see local wares produced in Tyre with Tyre fabrics that are also different. So are we talking about more workshops, or the same workshop were doing different products of the same form? So they were doing different types themselves. It's an interesting question. The problem is that we didn't recognize the workshops yet, because it's going to be very difficult, I think, to recognize workshops there. But we have to consider the problem of workshops, the time they were active, the people who were working in those workshops, and their productions. How you have to see those productions. The homogeneity can also spread in other shapes. Like, for example, we have another tomb here, which the 2 urns are identical. And here we have also local urns, different type, also in the same time, these amphoras that are typologically different. They are produced in Tyre, and even they change the orientation of the handles here, imitating probably Cypriot prototypes. So you have same workshops doing different productions, or doing different types themselves, which is as interesting. So in terms of how to approach those, the activities of the workshops, on the time. Obviously, these productions were for the people, for the society. In some cases, they were consumption products. In this case, for example, for banquets, you can recognize here clearly the shapes. Even you can recognize an import. This is from one of these famous metallic bowls from Cyprus. Well, here he's highlighting the scenes. We have also, for example, the use in cemeteries for ritual, religious purposes. In this case, for example, I can say that they were not ritual items, ceramics. They were items used in ritual instead. Here we have, for example, our colleague Michał Kruger. That is from the campaign of Albaz in 2008. And also we have productions for transport, for commercial purposes. Like, for example, we have here the Lisa shipwreck. Here is dated in the middle years of the 8th century. In my humble opinion, is a bit later than that. I think it's from the end of the 8th century, but this is another story. So, as I said, this workshop were coping or trying to meet the different demands of society, either social demands or economic demands. No, so it's very interesting how, as another topic, it will be how these workshops organize themselves, etc. This is another story. So now we have to talk about the main features of the Levantine pottery, Central Levantine pottery, let's say, because I wanted to focus here in Central Levant. So first, there are cultural manifestations with characterizing attributes and logical compositions. I mean, the composition, morphological and decorative composition of these pots is logical, particularly for the people who were using them. Going beyond, as I said before, our classifications, our numbers and letters. So, and also we have to consider that these objects were part of bigger assemblages of items used at the same time. And many times they get sense only in those assemblages. Second, we can talk about a ceramic grammar, because the way of doing things, how the pot is conceived, how the pot is elaborated, and what are the elements that compose the pot, are made in a way that follows several probably non-written rules that through observation you can more or less identify. And also you can have the grammar, and you can also have the orthography, how these elements are set together, and you can see sometimes what is not correct in the commas, if you want. Again, as I mentioned before, when you're trying to deal with this pottery, you have to also consider the workshops involved and the regional variations. Even though, for example, from my experience, variations between, for example, Tyre or Jiyeh or Beirut basically are through the fabrics in the composition of the morphology of the decoration are more or less homogeneous. I cannot see many differences except for the fabrics, because in Central Levant we have more than one fabric. And yeah, in terms of morphological or decorative issues or typological aspects is more or less the same. Also, it's relevant that when we deal with the pottery, we have to deal with entire assemblage to make sense. I mean, for example, making differences between red sleeve and plain wares or dichron wares. Yeah, maybe it makes more sense in other periods like classical times, but here in this time, sometimes the same form or the same type is represented in red sleeve and plain wares. So where do you set the border between them? And all these ideas lead to these 6 main features that characterize the Central Levantine pottery, which is standardization, functionality, conservatism, dynamism, linearity, and these words are accumulative. Standardization because the forms are constantly linked to a function. Types are the materialization of those concepts through differences in the arrangement of the different elements. It's important, as I mentioned before, how things are done. So we have to consider the regional characteristic, workshop characteristic, and also important sequential characteristics, in which point of the sequence we are. And we have to consider the technique, the morphology, the surface treatment, and the decorations, just to have an idea. So, for example, in standardization, forms are really standardized. I mean, in the Central Levantine repertoire, we have for example, in jars, we have the amphoroid crater, we have the cauldron, and we have the amphorae, the decorated amphorae. Each one with their own characteristic, but as you can see, this is from Albaz. Obviously, you can see how bodies repeat themselves. So the variation is only through the adding of different elements, like, for example, the handles here, which in some cases are here, but for example, the differences between the amphoid crater and the amphora are not so much, except for the position of the handles and where the decoration is. As you can see, they always tend to leave the area of the handles free of decoration. Always. Putting the decoration always either adapting the decoration to the morphology of the pot. No. Also, it's important the functionality and the conservatism. So, for example, you can see how shapes evolve, but they remain with the same ways, more or less. In this case, it's different. The cauldron here, the variation, but this is only a type of cauldron. One exception could be probably the storage jars, but the storage jar is a problem by themselves because we have to check between a storage jar for transport, for storage of which kind of transportation, no? Sea transportation or donkey or camel transportation, which is different. But even, for example, you can trace how from the early Iron Age, you can trace the evolution of the cooking pots so that remain more or less recognizable throughout the ages. So and also very important is that they are very, very functional. I mean, they are not complicated. They are made to serve, and that's all. I mean, they don't meet our aesthetic standards, let's say, or yeah, or probably they met their own standards. It's also dynamism. The repertoire is dynamic, is linear and accumulative. For example, you have here the plates, the evolution of the plate. From the early Iron Age, you have this upright and how it evolved from this to this one. That will be the late Iron Age examples. They don't look the same, but if you trace all the evolution, you see how you can go step by step in a logical way, trace the evolution. And everything is accumulative, so one change leads to the next. Another very nice example is the storage jars from the early Bronze Age to the Persian times. And you can see how this one and this one, the beginning and the end, they don't look alike. But if you put one after the other, it makes sense. So it's like when you put these chromatic bars where colors change gradually, giving place to another color. But it's very difficult to trace where the limits are between types or between situations, no? So, and sometimes when we approach this pottery, this material, we have to keep that in mind. Yeah, where we are exactly, no? Another example could be here from this linearity will be the evolution of some rims, the more typical rims in central Levant, this upright or thickened from inside, how they overlap throughout the ages. No, I don't going to go to the details because I want you to survive this lecture. So once we have we see what happens more or less in the central Levant, very synthetically, I have to say, we go to the west. So at some point, for some in the 10th century, for others like me in the 9th century, these people decide to go to the west in their ships. So they move to different territories, looking for business opportunities, because at the end of the day, it's business opportunities. I mean, they did nothing but transpond or adapt their experience for millennia to other places, in other social, cultural environments, like you can, where they met these local populations, like here, for example, in Santimbenia, in Sardinia, where is a local neuralgic site where Phoenician or Levantine sailors, traders used to go to make business with the local populations. There's no, Phoenician site nearby so far, even though the area, the environment is very good for a settlement. The Porto Conte Bay is a perfect place for an anchorage or for a settlement or an outpost, Phoenician outpost, but there's not. I mean, the closest one is Tarros in the south, to the south. So these Phoenicians contacted these populations. Then, for example, in Santimbenia now, I can say that we have evidence of presence that goes back to the first half of the 9th century. The work in this ambient here, 48, has produced material that go far back as the second half of the 9th century, more or less contemporary to Huelva, to the oldest material found in Huelva. But this is another story. Obviously, these Phoenicians had to adapt themselves to the different circumstances, to the different societies, to the different ways of doing things. And somehow, like happens nowadays with the Lebanese restaurants all over the world, where they are Lebanese restaurants, but all of them adapt themselves to the taste of the population, of the locals. So they have the basic things, but they always adapt themselves to the local tastes. This with time, these people coming from the east, they created settlements, sometimes in contact with the indigenous, sometimes not in contact with indigenous independently, like communities that were gradually growing. The more intense the economic activities were, the more people were coming. So with these people came also temples, like this one in Comos from the 9th century, or the Carambolo in Seville, the two temples, very complicated ones, and very interesting in terms of what is represented, but they follow clearly the Semitic layouts, and always the two temples together, which is also very important. And with them, we have the high-class merchants dealing with important materials. They were the princes of the sea, the Tzekaya used to call them. These are the big families, the big merchants that were working on metals or precious raw material, elements that were worth trafficking with and transporting from one place to the other of the Mediterranean. And these are the people who were, for example, buried themselves in the Hypogea in Trayamar, or they were able to have these alabaster urns in Almuñécar, in Sexy, in the settlement of Sexy, in the coast of Granada. But with them, we have also the commercial, the detail, trader that had the business focused to the local population, probably to the own local population. I mean, to the eastern communities that arrived there, attracted by all these economic activities. I always try to make a difference between colonies and these Phoenician settlements, outposts, enclaves. The only, in my view, the only colonies in the West are Carthage, that had a state structure by their own, and probably Ibiza. For the rest, they were outposts living with the indigenous populations. So they have to adapt themselves to the indigenous population, even though they have their own lives, but they didn't control territories, they didn't control governments, they didn't control anything but themselves. Yeah, they control the trade, which was very important, let's say, probably. But they didn't control the governments, or not directly. These traders, we have them, for example, in the souk in Cerro del Villar, where they used to, to do their business, focused to the local populations, or to other settlements nearby, but limited in geographical scope. And with them, immigrants, people that went to those places looking for a better times, to better chances to live, in a process that was very, very slow, probably gradual. All these people obviously brought their own customs, their own habits. And obviously, industries or people tend to cope or to meet all these needs that this new population had, not necessarily the local population, even though these Phoenicians or these Oriental became locals with time. But yeah, they kept their own traditions as they do nowadays. So this is this is how I think we have to focus or to approach all these Western overseas productions, no? Keeping in mind that is the demand of people that move to these areas to work, to make a life, and obviously they have their own demands. So yeah, obviously we can talk about cultural interactions, what happened with indigenous populations, if they were acculturated, on how they were acculturated. This is another story. For what we have here, the main demand is the people who were demanding this, if you allow me to express like that. The most important is the demand of this society, the new people coming here who settled there, and they wanted to make their lives by their own ways. One nice example of that is Cerro del Villar in Malaga. This is a reconstruction of the Cerro del Villar in the mouth of the Guadalhorce River. So we have here the evolution, because Cerro del Villar is the end of is a stage in an evolution, because first we have the Rebanadilla, the settlement of the Rebanadilla with San Isidro, which is the necropolis. At some point, the coast all this area seems that it was silted. So all the population had to move to this island, to Cerro del Villar. And actually, later, with the time, from Cerro del Villar, they moved to Malaga in the 6th century BC. So it's a nice evolution of how the first, or probably the earliest settlement or enclave found here in this area, how it evolved and became bigger at some point, and they have to move to another point, no, to Malaga. Cerro del Villar had pottery production, a very important pottery production. You can see productions from Cerro del Villar everywhere in the Iberian Peninsula and also in central Mediterranean areas. And this same pattern can be seen, for example, also in Malaga, from Toscanos or Chorreras and later Morro de Mezquitilla. So we have the same scheme. It's also interesting to see that other settlements or new settlements founded in other distant areas, like for example in Ibiza, in Sacaleta, the material culture is connected to Malaga productions. So probably we are talking about the possibility of second generation enclaves that have nothing to do with the Levant, with Tyre or wherever in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they were fostered by the overseas settlements. So I said, one example is Sacaleta. Sacaleta later is from the 7th century, later in the 6th century, if I'm not mistaken, they moved to Ibiza, and they settled on the hill of Ibiza, on the Ibiza. Or we have, for example, Lisbon. The material culture from Lisbon area is like Malaga. So probably we have another example of this second generation or second wave settlements. So people that probably originated in Malaga looking for business opportunities somewhere else and creating new enclaves that develop economic activities that, yeah, they were linked to Malaga probably, but later at some point they became more or less autonomous and more orientated to their own people. We have also to think that all this Lisbon area, the answer is here. All the tin and gold sources in Tajo River. So, as I mentioned before, Guadalhorce or the overseas centers of production centers, they produce their own pottery that, as you can see, they look Phoenician, but they're versions of Phoenician pottery. They have their own characteristics. And how can we explain these characteristics, the differences? Probably through workshops and through sequence. And also what is the origin point in time that marks the beginning of those productions. Because many times we don't know in what stage we are on. If we are at the very beginning of the production, of the activities of one workshop, or we are seeing the later productions of these centers. So I think we have to face several factors here, which is what is trade and what is local productions. What is the moment of the foundation of the workshops overseas, and from where the people came? That would mark the workshops' particularities, because obviously these new workshops will follow the traditions, the things they learn in the places of origin. It's also very important what is the market intercommas, obviously. So what is the demand of the productions? As I mentioned before, there's what is the origin of the potters, if it's Levantine, if other areas of the Mediterranean, but also potters, local potters. So indigenous populations that were producing pottery through their own parameters. That will explain a lot of things. And it's not a question of talking about hybridization or, yeah, hybrid productions, because many times I don't know if it's a hybrid or it's just the way to do things without any intercultural intentions, let's say. And also we have to focus on the particularities, if they are technical, typological, morphological, or decorative. Because, as I said before, Western productions are, they have the particularities. For example, if you compare, we are going to show only few examples. I don't want to show a lot, and I don't want also to extend myself too much. So, for example, we have as a model an amphorate crater from Albaz. So compare with amphorate craters from Salammbô, from Sulcis, and from Guadalhorce. So, for example, in the Western Mediterranean, amphorate craters are very rare. Instead, we have what is called the pithoid jar, which is here from Guadalhorce. And also, even though you can see that in Carthage, in Salammbô, on Sulcis in Sardinia, even though the form, the concept of the form is the same, everything is, all the elements of the jar are in the same place. The way they conceive the different parts, like the rims, the handles, the bases, are somehow different. And also the conception of the decoration. For example, the presence of these triglyphs on the shoulder, which are not common at this stage in the Levant, at least not in the central Levant. But on the other hand, they are very common, for example, in the central Levant, in the Axe, Carthage, Sicily, Sardinia. We have Albaz, this amphorae. So we have, like, let's say, the model from Albaz here on the top, and we have different variations from Sicily, from Sardinia, and from Carthage. They all are the same. You can see that they are the same form. The elements are all the same, more or less displaced in the same way, but we have differences in the rims, in the necks, and the handles, and also in the decorations. And again, this presence of the triglyphs on the shoulders. For example, it's very interesting to see that, as I mentioned before, in the Levant, it's very difficult to see decoration in the handles area, whereas in the center, in Western centers, it's common. It can appear. And going forward, another jar type, what we call in Albaz el cauldron. So we have the model from Albaz and the different variations from Carthage, and this case from Ayamonte in the border with Portugal in South Spain. As you can see, again, it's the same. We have the same form, but with particularities. And this, except for Ayamonte, this is a bit later, more or less, they are more or less contemporary. The ones from Salammbô, probably they are more or less contemporary, or even a bit later than the sample from Albaz in this case. And this mention of the triglyphs leads me to another point: how to explain, for example, as a study case, what happens with these triglyphs, which are not common at this stage in the sequence in the Levant, but that are common in the West. What happens? Why? Probably the question is when these productions in the West started, at least in Carthage. As you can see here, I show you this amphorate crater from Sarepta that shows the triglyphs, and this jack from Hilbert Celine that shows also the triglyphs in the same place. Compare with, for example, this, that will be 9th century, that will be probably first half of the 8th century, probably. It's Stratum D1, which is complicated by itself, but probably is first half of the 8th century. With a imitation of a skyphos from Carthage with the triglyphs, and this urn from Salammbô with the triglyphs. The difference between them is notorious. I mean, we are talking about 100 years or more than 100 years between the different. When these jacks, the skyphos and this urn was existing or were produced in the West, in central Levant, At least to my knowledge, triglyphs are not existing. So the question will be, one explanation will be when the potters started to produce their pottery in Carthage and what traditions they brought. So that brings us to the oldest materials in the West, which is Huelva. Huelva, as you may know, is a mix of different sequences or sequential stages, but the oldest material, in my opinion, cannot go beyond the middle decades of the 9th century BC, even though other colleagues, the colleagues that are working in the site or have worked in the site, they postulate older times and 10th century, even connecting them with Solomon and Hiram activities. I'm not so convinced on that, but okay. This is a question that we can discuss or not. So important is that we have a selection of these potteries. So that will be the oldest material, no? Even though here we can have some material that can be first half of the 8th century, this one too. This could be very old from the 9th century, this one from the 9th century, for example, no? Or this concentric decoration from the 9th century. Well, if we check what happens in the lowest levels reached so far in Cadiz, I would like to call your attention to these two plates here. These are the more typical, the one simple with bicron decoration and the one with these horizontal rims. Okay, these are variations. These two variations, you can find this combination and a very interesting point in the sequence, for example, in Tyre, which is here, the second half of the 9th century, from the stratum 9 to stratum 6, where you can see how the plates that evolved into the ones with horizontal rims, these ones here, are still at the highest. And the most common ones are the simple one, the rims, the plates with simple rims, which this point here. So there will be, for example, the evolution of these plates. As you know, or probably know, in Western Mediterranean, the plates are different. The rim of the plates are different. Whereas when in the East, the most common plates are these, with concave. In the West are convex. And the only explanation is that the model from which these plates evolved is here. That will be PCMA type 11. So you can see how these upright with rounded rims evolved to be direct. And later we can see in the West, in Bir Masud and Carthage, or in Cadiz, we can see the evolution of these plates. And for that, this means that the moment when the production of these plates in the West started has to be linked here in this sequential stage. So will be, yeah, at the very end of the second half of the 9th century or the very end of the 9th century, when the types in the East that evolved into the overseas plate variants were more common. And later in the West, they gave place to this. Whereas in the East, they have their own evolution. And it's also interesting because at this very sequential stage that I mentioned is when triglyphs were common in the East. So by that I'm saying that the production of pottery in overseas had started here at this stage, somewhere in the 9th century, in the second half of the 9th century, by using models that came from the East at that time. But in the West, once the production of pottery was settled in the West started to have their own evolution. They have to produce their own products, and they have their own varieties. This is, for example, there are two contemporary jugs. This one is from Albaz, the typical piriform mushroom lip jug from the end of the 8th century. In this case, this one still preserves the tab, the stopper. And we have more or less contemporary jug this one is from the museum from Cádiz. The location is unknown. In the Levant, for example, a globular jug of this type, or the mushroom lip type, globular with this kind of decoration is impossible. It doesn't exist. I mean, it's not. It doesn't. It's an orthographical or grammatical mistake. It's not logical. You cannot find this thing here in the East. So it's a local variation. Local variation that, for example, you can see of this, if you compare this tamburit jug from the first half of the 8th century with these sulcis variants from Halde, the sulcis variants, again with these triglyphs. And also very interesting to see other kind of productions, for example, like the gray wares that are typical from the Western Mediterranean. There will be the tomb one from Cortijo de San Isidro. That is dated in probably the second quarter of the 8th century, somewhere there, probably closer to the middle, to the 750. With these two very typical, the neck-ridge jug and the decanter, but they use as cups this gray ware pottery. And also we have the very particular productions from the West, like for example the Cruz del Negro, the Cruz del Negro urn, that is actually a variation of these jugs here. It's a product that, for example, it doesn't occur so often in the Central Mediterranean. It doesn't derive from the neck-ridge jugs, but from a family of jars that come from the late Bronze Age throughout the Iron Age in the Levant. That sometimes they have one handle, sometimes they have two handles. And it's a product that is typical from Western Mediterranean, and also is used as cinerary urn, something that doesn't happen in the Levant except for some very strange examples in Requeix, in the southern Levant. And also another clear example of particularities of particular productions in the West is as I mentioned before, the pithoid jar, which will be in the Western Mediterranean, will be the substitute of the amphorate crater. And also, as another paradigmatic example of productions, Western productions linked to Phoenician activities, is the so-called Santimbeni amphora. We can discuss the origin of these jars, but it's a nice example of adaptation, of local adaptation, indigenous adaptations to the demands of containers to trade with their own products, wine probably. So as a conclusions, well, I mean, I think 1 hour is I think we should focus if we want to approach the pottery in the West Central and Western Mediterranean. I think there are several points that we have to focus especially, which is first, which is what is the potter's background. I mean, what is the origin of the potter? We have sometimes, it's not the same if the potter comes directly from the Levant, that it comes from another place where they were producing the pottery in the overseas, like for example in Malaga, and this potter from Malaga moved to Lisbon, or today's Lisbon, or to North Africa, or to Ibiza. It's not the same. Also, it's not the same if the person who were working in the workshop was a local, an indigenous, who had to adapt them himself technically and morphologically, typologically, morphologically, and decoratively to the ideas of all the demands of the taste of the Phoenician population. That's why we have interpretations, versions, or even adaptations of elements. It's also very important what is the context of use. If the demand was from Phoenicians or from Levantine people, or from the descendants of these Levantine people settled in those places, or it was oriented to the indigenous population, if they were acculturated or not, or they adopted the habits of the Easterners. I think it's essential to focus regionally, because each region in the central and the Western Mediterranean had its own circumstances, from the local population, for the foreign groups involved, because not everyone came from the Levant. I mean, from the Levant or from the same place in the Levant. I mean, even though I'm working from Tyre, I mean, I couldn't conceive that all this phenomenon of diaspora came from Tyre or was fostered by Tyre. It's impossible. I mean, I don't think so. There were a lot of people involved, and people from other places on the Mediterranean. I mean, between, let's say, Tyre and Cadiz, there are a lot of territories in between. So there's a lot of people involved, a lot of groups involved, but we don't know from when or from where and when these people got involved. No. Also, the influences. What are the influences at these particular areas? For example, in central Levant, in Carthage, in the 8th, 7th century, there's a taste for imitating Aegean esquifoy. Sometimes they are more or less accurate, sometimes they are not. But what indicates is a taste from the local population to drink from esquifoy, or from foreign types, let's say. But this phenomenon doesn't occur in the Western Mediterranean, or is not so frequent in the Western Mediterranean. On the other hand, what is frequent in the Western Mediterranean are the Crudel Negro urns. I mean, no, sorry. So this type here, which in the Central Mediterranean is not common at all, or is not so common. So each area had its own characteristics. So approaching all this pottery as an homogeneous group or homogeneous manifestation is a problem, can lead to problematic results. And also, it's very important, in my opinion, is the sequence, to keep the sequence in mind, despite the C14 dates. We have to check, first of all, to recognize in which sequential moment we are on. So we have to see in what moment of the sequence we are, and second, what are the interconnection between the areas? Because, as I mentioned before, the possibility of second wave or second generation enclaves or settlements or production areas can also blur somehow the image of the evidence we are dealing with. For example, I'm talking about potentially in the mouth of Tahoe River or in Ibiza or in other areas. So, as I said, this regional perspective is essential. We have to leave aside the homogeneous view on this phenomenon. This phenomenon of the pottery phenomenon or the pottery production in the Western Mediterranean, Central Western Mediterranean, is a consequence of the people that were living in those places. And only from the people who were living in those places. So it responds to their own circumstances. So generalizations can be only very general, but trying to apply observations from one place to other areas can be problematic. And I think with that, I finished. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention. I hope I didn't bore you so much. Thank you very much.